Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Clockworks Shatter. In this episode, I like to talk about pubs, public lobbies, or public parties, whatever you prefer, and why people do not enjoy them. Just as a quick disclaimer though, anything I mention about pubs today is not meant to insult them, bash them, or berate them. It is meant to be used as a way to learn, engage, and educate the community on pubs. So with that, let's continue into our topic. I believe pubs to be in a bit of a weird spot within Spiral Knights. Yes, they're meant to be a form of quick play, but a lot of that gets null and void when you have friends either on Discord or in Spiral Knights, guilds, or even just going at the game solo. And I believe this puts pubs into a weird spot where it puts them into a false sense of hope in hopes that people will join despite everything I've listed before, and also those who just have a complete distrust of pubs, including myself. And I think a lot of that mistrust stems from the fact that there is a complete skill gap between those who do pubs and those who don't. Those who don't often have greater game knowledge, greater game skill, understanding of the mechanics and how enemies work and such, while those in pubs don't generally tend to do that. And if they do, it's actually very rare to see. And so this kind of creates a sort of vicious cycle where there are often parties full of lesser skilled players, or there may not even be public lobbies at all for certain missions. Like, for example, I never see Firestorm Citadel have public lobbies ever, and if I do, it's like 1 in a million. Generally within video games, public lobbies with people in PvE content often isn't as scary or aggravating compared to that if it's PvP counterpart, especially when the risk for reward generally isn't that great. Despite all this, though, it's quite the opposite within Spiral Knights. Let's use me for an example. Back in 2015, 2016, maybe even 2017, I would end up doing Vanna runs because that's just what I did at the time. I would always do public lobbies with people who would range from, okay, you're pretty good, to, oh, good lord, you're a Vanguard? With that skill level? But I would do parties with these people, and they would just astound me with how questionable their skill level is for being a Vanguard in Vanna. And it would aggravate me so much that I would be the one leaving the party, not them. I've done, well, I haven't necessarily done, but I've gotten through some lobbies with people who aren't even supposed to be at Vanna yet. And that's not that's excluding Defender elites who kind of have to go to Vanna at that point. I'm talking like Knight elites. And just that sort of stuff, seeing that stuff just makes me not want to do public parties because I can finish that content faster, or I just don't want to deal with those people because I just feel they're inadequate. They're the ones still staying in the parties, still completing the missions. And it proves a point that it's quite the opposite compared to that of generally more elitist people will gatekeep people from that content. So then that brings me to the question, why do pubs tend to have players of a lower skill level compared to that of those who don't do pubs? And, well, to answer that, it's not really the case that pubs are bad at teaching other players how to play the game. It's more so that there are other ways that are much better at teaching the game than just doing pubs. And to help explain our answer on that one, we can dive into two different fields, which I will explain separately. And so, the first field I want to talk about is friends and guilds. Friends and guilds are people you're often going to talk to more rather than that in a public party. Because with public parties, unless someone decides to initiate a conversation right away, you're generally not going to be talking a lot of the time and just kind of make one-off comments every once in a while. You do have the chance of sparking full-fledged conversations, and that is how you do make friends in Spiral Knights. But in the sense of just playing with friends and guilds specifically, you're far more likely to talk to them and learn more based on what they have to say to you. They can teach you a lot of things about game knowledge, mechanics, techs, and how to just generally play better in different playstyles. There's a lot to it that you can learn from them versus just playing in pubs and just trying to eyeball what the other person is doing. I myself, for example, was taught how to single switch from a friend earlier last year. And if I just played pubs, I wouldn't have known how to single switch unless I noticed someone doing that. And even then, some people may not be entirely perceptive as to what another person may be doing without asking what they're doing as well. Because I would have just thought, oh, they just have a really fast magma driver or whatever. No, in fact, there's a whole technique behind that. And so because of that, you're able to learn and absorb much more knowledge than that of like people who just generally do pubs. So now onto the second field. The second field is just simply playing the game solo. Playing the game solo doesn't necessarily allow you to ascertain a lot of the knowledge that you would learn from friends and guilds, but playing the game solo does a fantastic job at teaching you game mechanics, game sense, and overall just improves your skill because you've got everything converging on you, and you need to learn in a survivalist state as to how to improve. I myself have played the game, like as many other people have, solo for the longest time, and in a sense, Spiral Knights is better as a single player game, as much as I hate to admit it. Because with parties, another problem is that if you join a party, the more people within a party, the more HP the enemy scaling gets, and for some weapons, that can be a killer at times, because weapons need to kill within a certain range to become truly effective. A good example of this is that brandishes are really effective at 3-4 hitting slags. Well, if you're in a party, that bumps it up to almost double, if not a little more than double, the amount of hits needed to kill a slag with just a brandish because of the HP scaling. And so because of that, not only is content easier, content solo allows you to learn a lot about the enemies and how they react and work, because it requires you to focus on everything worldwide. You can't just have tunnel vision when it comes to solo play. You can a little bit when it comes to party play, and that's where it may not be so great to always try to learn game skill and game sense via friends and guilds, but with solo play, you really have to focus in, because in harder level content like Vanna and even danger missions, you have to be on the top of your game, otherwise you're not going to make it far. Well, then the question is, if you can't make it through the harder content solo, then why not just do a public lobby? And yes, that is a very good point, but then that kind of repeats back to the whole problem. Lesser players generally all queue up together, but those who end up with a higher skill level don't often do that, and so they don't join public lobbies. And so, in a sense, you want to do solo lobbies so that way you can get practice, because it's still good as a form of practice, since there is no repercussion for losing aside from your sparks if you want to spark. But the whole point of doing solo play is to get a better understanding of how the game works and build better game sense, so that way you can build yourself better as a person in terms of skill level, so that way you can tackle that harder content. Yes, a party may help, but you individually as a person will get better via solo play. An example of this for me would be when last year I started doing Dreams and Nightmares solo, because for the longest time I was always afraid of how extremely difficult Dreams and Nightmares was. And so by forcing myself to play the mission solo, I would understand how the enemies and level design works, so that way I can learn to get around it and even abuse it at some points. I would learn how the enemies would move and react within the mission, which made the final fight a hell of a lot easier when I realized, oh, I can just run in a circle and spam my magma driver. But it allows me to become better at content I normally wouldn't have before, which for the longest time before as Dreams and Nightmares came out originally, I deemed as one of the most difficult missions in the game. Now it's a really difficult mission that's just really annoying to go through. And, well, again, you can still learn a lot from doing public lobbies or with friends and guilds. It's just that when everything is converging and trying to kill you at once, you have to learn how to react and deal with everything simultaneously, which allows you to become a better player when it comes to a lot more not fight or flight situations, but more like panic situations where you have to make a decision on the dime. Although this does have its drawbacks a little bit. I'm not going to say I've gotten really good, but I've gotten really survivalist, that I've become so focused on myself because I've done solo plays so much that I've sort of become a liability to my teammates in a sense, where I completely tunnel vision out my teammates and focus on all the enemies around me. So anytime they end up getting hurt or killed because of me, I don't realize it, and I always apologize for it at the end, because because I'm so focused on my own survivability, which is what solo play is great for, but it's not great for team play in a sense. And actually, this goes straight perfectly into my next point. Party play may not always be perfect for everyone because, simply put, playstyles don't always match. There are playstyles that do not mesh well. For example, if we take the meta into account, the reason why people love going Combustors is because it increases damage output. And people who go with Glaciuses end up risking not only their own CC, but they also end up becoming a liability to the Combustors who are so focused on damage output, because the Glacius is against both of those. It's against straight up DPS, and the CC that it does help create ends up generally getting ruined by Combustors. And so some people may prefer to go solo simply because they don't have to worry about other people getting in their way, either because, well, they are a liability like I am, in a sense, but also sometimes playstyles just don't match up. Not everything works together perfectly in Spiral Knights. So then why is this a problem? This is a problem in a bit of a multi-step sort of way. It's a problem in the fact that because everyone does parties either solo, in a guild, or with friends, it makes doing pubs obsolete, in which case the whole function itself would be obsolete then. It's like you might as well just remove it from the game if that was the case. But at the same time, those who do pubs would be left with like nobody to do it with, and so if they're not good solo, it kind of screws them over in case if there is the chance that someone who is good can join in and help. But even then, they may not be still good solo enough and learn enough solo to actually get better at the game, in which case they do need someone else to help them out. But at the same time, it still perpetuates a vicious cycle of, if they want to get better, they got to do it solo, but if they don't, but then those who want to do pubs are left with nobody to do it with. And it's a weird vicious cycle, in a sense, that it's hard to explain, but also hard to solve. If it's hard to solve, then surely there's a way to fix it, right? Well, no, not exactly. I hate to say it. There's nothing that Grey Havens can do on their end to fix it, because this is all a player-driven thing, and they can't fix anything that's player-driven. That's just how it is, you know? But if there is one thing that you could do to fix it, is that if you're a higher skill level player, join public parties and teach these lower level skill level people how to get better at the game, better game sense, all that sort of stuff. If we want pubs to be popular again and not have a stigma amongst the upper level community, well, then we need to be the ones that engage and fix that ourselves, because we're the ones that sort of created the problem by just not doing pubs anymore, you know. And so by doing that, it'll help allow those of a lesser skill level improve upon themselves to be willing to play more. And I myself have learned a lot from people who are of a higher skill level doing pubs. That's how I originally got into 5-star when I was first new to the game. And that's why I'm so grateful for it, and the fact that I myself don't do that now, unless someone is willing to ask for help on a Discord or something, is a little shameful in a sense. And I'm not saying like everyone should go out and do that, but it would be cool if people would be more willing and accepting of public parties. I mean, I myself might even do public parties a bit more because of this. Because if we don't, well, then pubs are just going to continue to just remain there and just rot away as is. And this may even affect the player base a little bit, because then lesser skilled players aren't necessarily getting the experience they very well need to become better players at the game. We may very well have a lot of people who just are not good at Vanna simply because they don't have enough experience to be good at Vanna. It's very possible that that could happen if we just ignore pubs and just are not willing to help out new people in that sense. And I know that's not always the case. You know, we'll still get new players either naturally or by people willing to help out other people via Discord and such. But assuming that that's what's going to happen to the general population who do pubs, yeah, it's a bit sad to see, but that's just how it is, I guess. But really, that's just me seeing an extreme. I'm sure there are still going to be people who will continue to get better at the game no matter which way they play. Overall, I don't think pubs are necessarily bad. Well, any sort of matchmaking in a game is fantastic, of course. I mean, that's how you play a game. But with the various options that you can go about playing this game as well, it kind of renders it obsolete for most people. And that kind of puts it in a weird spot because people who do end up doing it are just kind of left on their own, so it's like they might as well just play solo. And those of a higher experience level who do end up playing with pubs often experience lower level play. Maybe even players that should not belong in that mission there in the first place. And it often leaves them kind of aggravated, as I've said before with my own experience. And there's also no real way to really fix this issue. So it's like, how do you go about solving something that you really can't solve, but is also leading to a great divide between players, at least skill level wise? Just a bit of food for thought on that one. So what are your guys' thoughts on it? Do you think pubs are fine? Do you think pubs are a problem? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Do you have any solutions? Any of that? This topic has so many talking points to it that we could have videos upon videos of this discussion, but I think it's best if it's just left to this as is. But with that, I think that wraps up today's episode of Clockworks Chatter. Thank you guys so much for watching today's episode. I know today's topic was a bit weird, considering no one ever really talks about pubs, but I think it's worth mentioning because, well, yeah, no one ever talks about pubs, and they're in such a weird state that maybe it's time to finally do something about it. I don't know. Because every time I've ever heard pubs ever get talked about in like some Discord or whatever, it's always talking about how bad people are in them, and I understand where that sentiment comes from, but at the same time, being the kind person going out of your way to help them is always the better thing to do, rather than just gatekeeping yourself from doing pubs with other people. But that's just my personal take on it. And not to sound cliche or anything, but I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Even if it's like only for a day and then you unsubscribed afterwards, because in the end, support is free, but it would mean a lot to me if you subscribed. And also, any sort of comments you leave on my channels, I always do read and will generally respond to. I read any and every comment, because I always get a great sort of satisfaction out of reading each and every single one. Thankfully, recently I've been getting a lot of time to record, so expect a lot more videos soon. Even Sprawlnight's videos, in fact. I've got some fun stuff in the works soon, so yeah, be on the watch out for that. But with that, I'd like to say again, thank you guys so much for watching today's episode of Clockworks Chatter, and I'll see you in the next episode. I'd like to bid you all farewell. Goodbye.